10 squats after a meal sound too small and too silly to change anything happening inside your body. But right now, while your last bite is still dissolving, something invisible is racing through your bloodstream, waiting to be handled. Sugar from that meal is entering your blood, and your body has only seconds to decide what happens to it next. Store it as fat, circulate it dangerously, or burn it instantly through muscle that is sitting completely idle on your couch. Most people think squats after eating are a tiny workout, a small way to cancel out the calories they just consumed. That is not what is actually happening, and understanding the real mechanism will completely change how you think about movement. 10 bodyweight squats cannot erase a cheeseburger, and they will never melt fat directly off your stomach or waistline. The energy burned is almost nothing, so if you are chasing calories, this habit will disappoint you immediately and permanently. But calories were never the real story here, because something far more interesting is happening at the cellular level. The real story is timing, and timing is something almost nobody thinks about when they finish a meal and sit down. The moment food enters your mouth, digestion begins tearing it apart into sugars, fats, and amino acids instantly. Carbohydrates break down into glucose, which slips through your intestinal wall and floods directly into your bloodstream within minutes. As glucose rises, your pancreas panics slightly and releases insulin, a hormone whose entire job is damage control. Insulin grabs that circulating sugar and forces it into your cells before it can linger and cause harm to your vessels. Your liver receives the first wave, acting like a sorting warehouse that stores some sugar and releases the rest carefully. Your muscles are the second destination, and this is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating and completely underappreciated by most people. Skeletal muscle covers a massive portion of your body, giving it enormous potential to absorb and use incoming glucose. But when you finish eating and immediately collapse onto the sofa, those muscles have zero reason to demand extra fuel. Insulin still works quietly in the background, but a resting muscle behaves like a warehouse with its loading doors closed. A contracting muscle, however, opens a second entrance, one that barely depends on insulin working correctly at all. This is exactly why 10 squats become biologically powerful at precisely the wrong moment nobody thinks twice about. As you lower your hips and rise again, your quads, glutes, hamstrings, and calves fire together instantly and forcefully. Muscle fibers shorten, tension builds rapidly, and your cells suddenly demand energy currency called ATP without any hesitation. Your muscles only store a tiny reserve of ATP, so they scramble to regenerate it using stored fuel immediately. At the same moment, calcium floods into muscle fibers, triggering contraction and alerting your body that real work is occurring. Special energy sensors detect this effort and summon glucose transporters called GLUT4 to the surface of your cells rapidly. Think of GLUT4 transporters as small doors that swing open specifically to let glucose enter your hungry muscle cells. Insulin can open these doors, but muscle contraction opens them too, through a completely separate and independent pathway entirely. That distinction matters enormously if your body has become less responsive to insulin over months or years of inactivity. With insulin resistance, insulin knocks on the door and nothing happens, forcing your pancreas to shout louder and louder. Contracting muscle offers a second, quieter door that bypasses the argument entirely and still lets glucose inside safely. 10 squats will not cure insulin resistance, but they add a contraction signal exactly when glucose is flooding in. Blood flow changes too. As your leg vessels widen, your heart beats slightly faster, and oxygen rushes toward working tissue. Instead of leaving your largest muscles completely idle after eating, you hand them a short, focused, urgent assignment. But the size of that assignment matters more than most people realize, and this is where honesty becomes important. 10 controlled squats take roughly 20 to 40 seconds, which is genuinely a tiny dose compared to real exercise sessions. Studies showing dramatic post-meal glucose improvements usually involve several minutes of movement, not one brief set alone. Some experiments using repeated squats or chair stands found real benefits, while other short protocols produced almost nothing measurable. So the honest expectation is not a dramatic glucose crash, but a modest, quiet, sometimes barely detectable improvement instead. Even so, this tiny set happens during a genuinely useful metabolic window that most people waste completely by accident. After a carbohydrate meal, glucose rises steadily as digestion continues, and the timing of that rise varies between people. Movement performed after eating affects glucose more directly than movement performed before eating because muscles need fuel immediately. This does not mean squatting the second you put your fork down, especially if your stomach feels heavy or unsettled. For most people, a comfortable window sits somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes after finishing their meal entirely. There is no perfect universal minute because digestion simply does not run on an identical clock for every single person. On day 1, the most noticeable effect will likely have nothing to do with glucose or metabolism whatsoever. Your breathing deepens slightly, your pulse rises briefly, and your knees and hips move through ranges they rarely use. If you have been inactive, your thighs may burn surprisingly early, sometimes before you even finish 10 repetitions comfortably. Internally, the contraction signal fires almost instantly, but the overall effect on your glucose curve depends entirely on effort. For someone deconditioned, 10 chair squats recruit a meaningful amount of muscle and create a genuine metabolic demand. For someone who trains regularly, 10 unweighted squats barely register as effort and produce almost no measurable difference. The exact same repetition count can therefore represent two completely different biological doses depending entirely on your fitness level. Exercise is never measured only by numbers on paper, but also by tension, effort, muscle mass, and total time. After your second and third meals, this entire process repeats itself quietly, again and again, throughout your ordinary day. Instead of expecting one workout to protect you all day long, you place small signals near separate incoming waves. This is precisely why squatting after each meal behaves differently than doing 30 squats once during a single morning. The total repetitions stay identical, but the timing spreads across every moment your body is actively processing food. Within the first few days, your nervous system begins learning this new movement pattern faster than you might expect. Early improvement usually comes from better coordination, not new muscle tissue, as your brain recruits motor units more efficiently. Your balance may feel steadier, your motions smoother, and the squat may require noticeably less conscious mental effort. You might also feel soreness, particularly through your quadriceps and glutes, especially during that very first uncertain week. Soreness does not prove the routine is working, and more soreness never automatically means better metabolic health outcomes. It simply reflects unfamiliar load meeting untrained tissue, nothing more dramatic or mysterious than ordinary physical adaptation occurring quietly. Severe pain is different though, and sharp joint pain or chest discomfort should always stop you immediately without hesitation. After roughly a week, something larger than the exercise itself begins quietly shifting inside your daily behavior and routine. Eating is usually followed by automatic behavior, sitting at a desk, collapsing on a couch, or returning to your car. Attaching 10 squats to the end of every meal interrupts that automatic sequence completely and replaces it with intention. The meal becomes a cue for movement, and a decision that once required willpower slowly becomes automatic and effortless. That behavioral shift may eventually matter more than any calories burned during the actual 10 squats themselves ever could. A tiny habit becomes a doorway, and after squatting, you might refill water, clear the table, or simply take the stairs. None of these outcomes are guaranteed, but reducing friction around movement is one of the most realistic changes possible. Inside your muscles, each session creates a brief window of increased fuel demand that lingers slightly after you finish. With a genuinely challenging contraction, muscle stays more receptive to glucose even after the movement itself is ended. However, 10 easy repetitions provide a smaller stimulus than a full workout, so this effect should never be exaggerated. Think of the set as briefly improving traffic flow through your bloodstream, not permanently rebuilding the entire highway system. Your pancreas may benefit indirectly because if muscle removes glucose without needing insulin, less insulin gets released overall afterward. This matters more for someone starting with higher post-meal glucose than for someone whose regulation already works efficiently. Your liver gets involved too, since insulin normally tells it to slow glucose production and store some as glycogen. If muscle uptake improves, the entire system clears that post-meal spike slightly more easily over repeated days. Regular activity supports liver health broadly, but 30 daily squats alone should never be called treatment for anything serious. Your blood vessels experience every meal as well, since large glucose spikes can quietly increase oxidative stress over time. Physical activity supports vascular function through multiple pathways, including increased blood flow through delicate vessel linings and tissue. But again, one brief set is a small input that cannot neutralize smoking, poor sleep, or chronic total inactivity. The more important story might actually be happening somewhere else entirely, inside the slow relationship between muscle and aging. After roughly age 30, adults gradually lose muscle mass and strength, especially when daily activity stays consistently low. Muscle is not only tissue that moves your body, but also a major site for glucose disposal and stability. Squatting practices the fundamental ability to sit down and stand up, a movement used constantly throughout ordinary daily life. For a previously inactive person, 30 repetitions spread across the day may quietly improve confidence and muscular endurance noticeably. But your body adapts to repeated demands, and squats that felt hard in week 1 grow easier by week 4. That adaptation feels good, but it also means the metabolic stimulus quietly shrinks the longer you stay comfortable there. Once your body performs the set, those same 10 repetitions no longer challenge it the way they once did. This is one of the most surprising truths about the entire routine, because success gradually makes it less powerful. To keep building strength, muscles generally need progressive overload, meaning the challenge must increase gradually over passing weeks. That could mean a slower lowering phase, a deeper comfortable range, an extra set, or added external resistance eventually. For glucose management specifically, extending movement to a few minutes or adding a short walk creates a larger demand. This is where the entire process quietly changes direction, from building strength towards simply maintaining a reliable daily trigger. During the first weeks, the squats themselves are the challenge you are working through and gradually growing stronger against. During later weeks, the real value becomes the trigger itself, a reliable cue connecting eating directly to movement. The routine can remain your minimum daily action, while longer walks and structured training provide broader fitness improvements elsewhere. Now let's talk honestly about belly fat, because everyone eventually asks whether this habit will finally shrink their waistline. 10 squats after 3 meals equals 30 squats daily, but total energy expenditure remains genuinely modest across the day. Using more glucose during activity is simply not the same thing as losing stored body fat over several weeks. Long-term fat loss depends largely on sustained energy balance, while fat distribution depends on genetics, hormones, sleep, and stress. You cannot instruct your body to remove fat specifically from your abdomen simply because your legs happen to be working. Muscles performing squats pull fuel from multiple sources, never directly from fat sitting quietly above them or nearby organs. Visceral fat may decrease with meaningful overall weight loss and consistent exercise, but 30 days of squats alone guarantees nothing. The scale might not move at all, and your waist might look exactly the same after this entire experiment ends. That does not automatically mean the habit had no value whatsoever, even if the mirror refuses to show obvious change. You might be standing up more easily, moving more often, and spending noticeably less time completely inactive after eating. Your post-meal glucose pattern might improve modestly, particularly after carbohydrate-heavy meals, though confirming that requires real measurement. Even a continuous glucose monitor can create confusion, since glucose naturally shifts day to day for countless unrelated reasons. Two apparently identical meals can produce completely different curves because of sleep, stress, hydration, or hormonal cycle changes. A single lower reading after squats does not prove those repetitions caused the difference you happen to notice that day. Look for repeated patterns across similar conditions instead. Never trust one dramatic graph from a single isolated afternoon. 30 days is also far too short to draw strong conclusions from something like hemoglobin A1C testing results. A1C reflects average glucose exposure across roughly 2 to 3 months, with recent weeks weighing more heavily overall. A small post-meal routine could contribute to a healthier long-term pattern, but promising major A1C shifts would be dishonest. The meal itself remains a genuinely powerful variable that squats simply cannot override no matter how consistently you perform them. 10 squats after a balanced meal with protein, fiber, and vegetables might help manage a naturally controlled glucose response. The same 10 squats after a massive meal and several sugary drinks will not make those two situations metabolically equal. Movement supports good nutrition, but movement can never make careless meal composition completely irrelevant to your overall health outcome. Sleep changes your response too, since poor sleep reduces insulin sensitivity and increases hunger the very next day afterward. Psychological stress raises hormones that encourage your liver to release additional glucose, working directly against everything you were attempting. If you are exhausted, stressed, and sitting most of the day, squats remain useful, but their visible impact shrinks considerably.
Medication adds another layer entirely, since insulin users, or those prone to low blood sugar, need extra careful awareness. 10 squats are unlikely to match a long workout's effect, but you should always continue following your existing care plan. Never independently reduce medication simply because you started squatting, and always discuss new routines openly with your treating clinician. Technique matters enormously too, because a common mistake is dropping into the deepest possible squat purely for intensity's sake. Depth is never a competition, and your feet should be placed wherever you personally feel stable, balanced, and controlled. Your knees should generally follow your toes, and your hips should move back and down slowly under complete control. Use a sturdy chair behind you if you feel uncertain about balance, depth, or general confidence during early repetitions. Another common mistake is holding your breath and straining unnecessarily, so inhale as you lower and exhale as you rise. People with certain heart conditions, uncontrolled blood pressure, or serious joint disease may need a gentler, individualized version instead. A simple sit-to-stand from a stable chair or a supported partial squat can work just as effectively. The third major mistake is treating squats as punishment owed for eating, as though movement must earn or erase food. Exercise should never become payment attached to every meal, since that mindset quietly destroys long-term consistency and enjoyment. The real goal is simply giving your muscles a brief job during a genuinely useful metabolic window, nothing more dramatic. That mindset alone makes consistency dramatically easier and removes the painful temptation to punish yourself after occasional overeating. A practical 30-day version begins with a stable setup and absolutely no pressure to perform it perfectly immediately. After each main meal, wait until your stomach feels settled, usually somewhere between 10 and 30 comfortable minutes. Stand with feet roughly shoulder-width apart, though your individual anatomy might require a slightly wider or narrower stance. Keep your entire foot pressed into the floor, lower with control, and rise by pushing firmly through your heels. Complete 10 smooth repetitions at a pace that still allows completely normal, relaxed, uninterrupted breathing throughout the entire set. If a full squat feels uncomfortable, perform 10 controlled sit-to-stands from a firm chair instead, comfortably. Use your hands lightly on a countertop or chair back whenever your balance feels even slightly uncertain or shaky. If 10 repetitions feel too difficult initially, begin with fewer and build gradually toward the full number over time. If they feel extremely easy instead, slow the lowering phase or add a few minutes of gentle walking afterward. Try performing the set after meals that produce your largest glucose load, but never obsess over hitting an exact minute. Consistency always matters more than perfect timing, and showing up imperfectly beats skipping the routine entirely out of frustration. On days when squatting feels impractical, a brief walk or gentle stair climbing can serve the exact same basic purpose. The purpose is always interrupting inactivity in recruiting muscle, regardless of which specific movement you happen to choose that day. Keep this entire routine in honest perspective, because 10 squats after every meal are simply an activity snack, nothing more. For broader strength, cardiovascular health, and healthy aging, combine this habit with regular walking and proper resistance training sessions. Add sufficient recovery and nutrition that genuinely supports your goals rather than expecting squats alone to carry everything. After 30 consistent days, the most realistic transformation will likely feel subtle, quiet, and easy to overlook at first. Your legs may feel more capable, and standing from a chair might suddenly require noticeably less conscious physical effort. You might automatically move after eating instead of remaining seated for hours without ever really thinking about it consciously. Your muscles may handle post-meal fuel more actively, and your glucose response may improve modestly over repeated weeks. But the deeper lesson here is that metabolism responds not only to what you eat, but to what happens next. 10 squats cannot cancel a meal, melt belly fat, or replace real structured exercise, and they were never meant to. What they can do is open a brief route for glucose, interrupt sedentary time, and create a repeatable signal to move. Your body never requires every healthy action to feel dramatic, urgent, or exhausting in order to genuinely matter over time. Sometimes the most powerful habit is simply the one small enough to repeat and strong enough to lead somewhere further.